Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing His mercy and His grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, He'll prepare for us a place.
When we
all get to heaven,
what a
day of rejoicing that will be when we all see Jesus. We'll sing and shout the victory. While we walk the pilgrim pathway, clouds will overspread the sky. But when traveling days are over, not a shadow, not a sign.
When we
all get to heaven,
what a
day of rejoicing that will be when we all see Jesus. We'll sing and shout the victory. Let us then be true and faithful. All right. So again, we're going to have another chapter in this book. This is the way that every chapter has begun. Then the Lord said to Moses, and there is not a book in our Bible that reminds us as often as this book that the things that we're reading are from the mouth of God. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the priests, the sons of Aaron, and say to them, no one shall defile himself for a dead person among his people." I'm going to stop there for a moment. You have to go back a little bit. Earlier in the book, he talked about the fact that if you touched, remember that there's about 2 or 3 chapters there, he was dealing with the things that made you unclean and that defiled you. There were some food regulations, there were some behavior regulations, and then one of the things he said was if you touched a dead person, you were made unclean. So what he's saying here is that a priest is not to defile himself for a dead person. That just means that the priest is not to do what? How did you defile yourself with a dead person? All you had to do is touch it. So if the priest is not to defile himself for a dead person, it is a prohibition of priests doing what? Handling and doing the things that we have to do with the dead. We don't just let dead people lay, do we? We pick them up, clean them up, process them, and get them ready for burial. This was a prohibition that the priests were not allowed to do that, because touching a dead body made you unclean, and the priests were not to be unclean. Now, before we get into this anymore, I want us to remember something. We talked about the fact that this chapter is focused on purity and holiness that is required of those who serve before the Lord as priests. Okay, that's the whole chapter. The New Testament will later describe Christians as a holy priesthood that are offering spiritual sacrifices, which are acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 5. And so as we read these priestly laws about how important it is for them to not defile themselves in order for them to do this work and have the relationship with God that they had to have, we need to understand that it's teaching us and explaining to us the seriousness of drawing near to God in service. It is not a light thing to be a Christian. It shouldn't be taken for granted. Those who belong to God and who serve before him are called to holiness. And just like these people are told they are not to profane God, we're going to get to that later in the chapter. The same is true for us. We have to live in such a way that we reflect God's holiness and work extra diligently to avoid defiling ourselves such that we will profane God and the things of God. So we got to keep that in mind. Now, there are some exceptions for the priest, right? The priest is not to touch a dead body except, and the exceptions are in verses 2 and 3. The mother, the father, the son, the daughter, or the brother, or an unmarried sister who is dependent upon him. Why would an unmarried sister be dependent upon a priest? Well, it's relatively simple. We're going to assume mom and dad are gone. She's unmarried. She doesn't have a husband. So who's responsible for her? The oldest brother. So immediate family members. If it's one of your immediate family members, God permitted them to defile. Now, this does not mean that they were not made unclean by handling the dead body. They were, in fact, made unclean. They had to go through the ritual processes of becoming clean again. But these are the only people they were allowed to touch. And then it goes a step further in verse 4 and makes it very clear how limited this is and says that the in-laws are not included in this exception. So when you get down to verse 4, he shall not defile himself as a relative by marriage among his people. So he's married, his wife has a family, he is not allowed the same exception with her family that he's allowed with his own. Priests are not to make bald patches on their heads, shave the edges of their beard, or cut their flesh. Verse 5. What is all that about? Anybody have an idea at all? All these are things that people used to do to show mourning and grief and despair and all those things. Well, it's weird, and it was pagan. These are the nations around them that practice these things. And no, he says, no, y'all don't do that. Y'all need to be different than the people around you. That's not how, what do we do? Let's say we get our toddler, and our toddler gets mad and goes and starts banging his head against the wall. What do we say to our toddler? Yeah, stop. That's not how we show our anger. That's not appropriate. When kids get a little bit older, we do the same thing with them when they decide when they're mad at somebody, they decide it's their job to seek revenge, and they go start hitting on people or harming them in some way. We stop. No, that's not how we deal with this. You don't deal with problems that way. The appropriate way to deal with problems is, okay, pray about them. What about between me and a person? Okay, Jeff, let's assume Jeff does me wrong. Yeah, no. We talk. To sit and talk about it, talk through it, solve the problem. Act like rational, reasonable people. We don't behave the way that people in the world behave, is the point here. And so he tells them, Don't get upset and start shaving ball patches in your head. That's what people who have no hope do. That's what people who don't know any better do. Don't start cutting yourself. By the way, that's a problem. People still do that today. Um, so it's not just a religious thing, because people that do it today aren't doing it for religious reasons. It's just a way that they come up with to cope with whatever the problem is. He's saying you don't act that way. Verse 6, he gives a reason why. They shall be holy to their God and not profane the name of their God. Our behavior, the things that we do in response to the world, can profane the name of God. Now, that's not the way we say it in East Texas. Anybody know how we say it in East Texas? Bring reproach upon the Lord, or bring reproach upon the church. They shall be holy to their God and not profane the name of their God, for they present the offerings by fire to the Lord. They're engaged. These are people who function in the temple before the altar of God. They eat the bread of their God. They shall be holy. Again, take this out of the Mosaic law, take this away from the temple and away from that priesthood, and make the application to this covenant. Who are the priests? Who are the ones offering up spiritual sacrifices? Who are the ones that are the light of the world, the salt of the earth, the representatives of the name of God in the world? Well, that's Christians, all Christians. And so the principle that's at play here applies to each one of us. It matters how we react. It matters what we do. It matters how we respond, even down to things like if and I don't know that there's maybe there is, I don't know, I guess there's some hairstyles that someone may take to convey a message. That's what he's talking about when he said trimming the edges of the beard. That they had a practice to show whatever frustration that they were trying to show that was going around it, that they cut off the edges of their beard. And when someone saw someone with their beard cut that way, they knew what they were trying to say. He says, don't do that, because your behavior reflects on the things of God. You're the one that functions in his temple. And people know that. And so behave appropriately. Look at verses 7, 8, and 9. They shall not take a woman who is profaned, a harlot, a profane woman, or a divorced woman, verse 7. Were priests allowed to marry? Yes, they were allowed to marry. They were not allowed to marry a harlot, a profane woman, or a divorced woman. Now, what we're talking about here is people who were not righteous and pure sexually, people who were not appropriate for marriage. You remember that exchange that Jesus had with the Pharisees, and they asked him about divorce? And he said, well, from the beginning it wasn't so. And they said, why did Moses then say to give her a certificate of divorce? And he said, what? But due to the hardness of your hearts, Moses permitted it to be so. But from the beginning it was not so. We find out right here that for the priests, it was not so. They had a divine standard that they had to operate under, and it involved who they married. Why? Verse 7, for he is holy to his God. The priest is holy. He's a righteous person in fellowship with God. He functions in the temple of God, stands before the altar of God. He needs to not be defiled in his marriage. The people are to regard the priest as holy because, what does verse 8 say? You shall consecrate him, for he offers the bread of your God. He shall be holy to you, for I, the Lord, who sanctifies you, am holy. The people to regard him as sanctified because of his fellowship with God. And then he says, the Lord who sanctifies you. How are they sanctified? How are we sanctified? How is anyone sanctified? How is any human being ever sanctified? Something God has to do. Verse 9, if a priest's daughter profanes herself by harlotry, she profanes her father. Now, he's going to send a prophet who's going to make it very, very clear that the sins of the father do not make the son guilty, and the sins of the son don't make the father guilty, that the soul who sins shall die. This is not working against that principle. This is a teaching concept. And just like they were held to this higher standard themselves, to not profane themselves in their marriages, to teach them how their behavior reflected on God, their Father, he said, if your daughter becomes a harlot, that's a shame to you. By the way, I think that's a natural thing. I don't think he had to command that. I don't think you have to be commanded to be ashamed when your children do things that are wrong. I think you pretty naturally feel ashamed, which is why we don't do what? When our children mess up really, really bad, what do we not do? I tell you, we don't advertise it.
So if a woman has a child, but she doesn't have a husband for the child, that would mean she's gone.
Yes. But what's the point here? See, I think the natural tendency, because we don't go around telling people, let me tell you about my child and how bad my child is and all these things that my child done. What do? We don't talk about those things. Why don't we talk about them? Because we already have a sense of shame about them, right? I don't think he's having to command them to have a sense of shame. I don't think anybody, I really don't. I don't think anybody ever in history, especially a father, had a daughter and said, boy, I really hope my daughter turns out to be a harlot one day. I don't think anyone ever felt that way. Or if their daughter turned out that way, thought, well, I'm so proud of the decision you made, and I'm going to support you in it. Here, let me drive you to work. I don't, well, don't get ahead of me. What we want to note here, though, is that he's telling him, you know how this works, that if this happens with if this was to happen with your daughter, how it profanes you, it reflects back on you. That is what happens when we act in unclean ways. It reflects back on our Father in heaven. So he did. This is an interesting one, by the way. These are This is one of the anomaly places. What was the normal way that God commanded for execution? Stoning. That was the most common thing. That is not what he says here. She is to be burned with fire. That's a pretty severe punishment. And the answer is no. And the priest, verse 10, who is the highest among his brothers, on whose head the anointing oil has been poured, who is that? Anybody know who that's talking about? The high priest, who has been consecrated to wear the garments, shall not uncover his head, nor tear his clothes, nor shall he approach any dead person. Any dead person. So we've got these greater restrictions that are under consideration. Look down at verse 11. How far does this any dead person go? Even for his father or his mother. His brothers and sisters had to take care of mom and dad. He, the high priest, could have nothing to do with that. He's not to leave the sanctuary or profane it, verse 12. Why? For the consecration of the anointing oil of his God is on him. He has publicly been identified as the high priest.
So on verse 9, where it says, she shall be burned with fire, is that like she gonna be burned?
Executed. No, I believe they were executed.
She can be burned to death.
Yeah, I think she was executed.
Okay.
And the reason is because the consequences are teaching what? How severe the behavior is.
That's pretty rough.
It's pretty rough. He's to marry, verses 13 to 14, again speaking of the high priest, he's to marry only a virgin from his own people. He is not to profane his offspring among his people. Verse 15. Let's read how the New American Standard words this, that he may not profane his offspring among his peoples. For I am the Lord who sanctifies him. So he is sanctified, therefore he needs to marry a pure woman so that their offspring are not defiled, because I have sanctified him. That's the second time he said that already in this chapter, isn't it? Given as a reason, because I sanctified. What does that word mean again? Sanctify?
That's like fenced, huh?
It means to set apart and declare holy. To consecrate. That's the other word that you'll see used sometimes. The priest is consecrated unto the Lord. So understand and don't get caught up in the periphery for purposes of our discussion. And yes, some of this is, I mean, it's severe. Is that a good word to use? Severe? Some of it's severe. But don't get caught up in all that. Notice that what he's saying to them is, as a priest, you are consecrated for my service. People know that you are wearing priestly garments. People associate you with me. They associate you with my house. They associate you with my service. So you need to make certain that you don't profane yourself because you will bring that into me and to reflect on me. Now, just to make you understand how this can happen, without digressing too much, I hope, everybody know what the Crusades were. The Crusades in medieval times. These were knights who left the Western world and went into the Eastern world and went to battle, trying to win back the Holy Land for the church. And they killed a bunch of people. They literally fought wars to try to gain control of Jerusalem. And they massacred the people who were living there at the time. Did God ever ask us to do that? No. Did that bring any glory or honor to God? No. And in fact, what it did was bring reproach upon him. Because still to this day, hundreds of years removed from that activity, there are people out there that will tell you there have been more wars fought in the name of religion and more people killed in the name of religion than anything else. And you know what they're talking about? The Crusades. And then what happened kind of contemporary, a little bit later, the Inquisition, which was an effort to purify the church. Only they didn't do it in a way that glorified God. They did it in a very carnal way. They tortured people. And if they couldn't get a confession, they killed them, burned them at the stake, or, well, lots of terrible things. When we behave that way and we do it in the name of Christ, that is the way people look at God. That's the character they see. And they associate that with God, and they associate that with his worship. Now, gratefully, none of us are doing anything like that today, but you know what we are doing? Living like everyone else in the world, defiling ourselves in sin, being just as greedy and just as over sexualized and just as immoral as everyone else in the world. And this applies to us. It's saying when we do that, and people know, and people do know, that we profess Christ, we're doing the exact opposite of what we're supposed to. What we're supposed to be doing is what? Being the pillar and support of the truth, holding it up, glorifying God. But instead, we're bringing reproach upon him. We're defiling him. And he can't have fellowship with us if that's the way we live. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's just everywhere. It's not any one group. It's all of us. We have to make certain that as Christians, as professing New Testament Christians who claim to be seeking to follow God, this applies to us. We need to seek to not defile ourselves and to do what is right. Now, are we obligated by these rules the way that the priests were? Not exactly, no. That's not the point, though. All right. The clock says it's time to stop. So we will. There's enough left that we probably need to pick up in verse 24 next time and finish this chapter before we get into chapter 20. Oh, you know what? No, there's not. There's only one verse, right? We're in verse 24. So Verse 24, so Moses spoke to Aaron and to his sons and all the sons of Israel. It ends where it starts. God said to Moses, this is what Aaron and his sons need to know. And Moses took it and did what? Told Aaron and his sons. All right, so we will pick up in chapter 22 next time, if the Lord wills.
Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing his mercy and his grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, he'll prepare for us a place. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be.